Good day to you. This is Anagalactic on May 6th, 2025, and we are in a series on numbers where we've gotten to null, un, and dual, which my good friend down at the coffee shop yesterday translated correctly when I showed it to him. He said he puzzled on it and he said 0, 1, 2, which is correct. Now, we have gotten to the number 1 and have not begun discussing it yet. I want to set the tone and the pace for a thorough exploration of the first 3 numbers, if you include 0, which we must include because that's the number we need to get a distance metric on the line. You have to cut off the line at 0 in order to get a distance. And that is the function of 0. It works with add on the line. That is the only operator that can use 0. The multiplication division operator pair, which is one of only 2 pairs of operators in the standard approach to mathematics, is addition and subtraction apply to the line with add. Well, addition and subtraction apply to the line to get a metric, which is linear spatial separation, which we call distance, also is sometimes called length in certain contexts, but it's from 0 to some number. And that is the concept of distance, which we've known about for millennia. Multiplication and division are the other pair of operators. It turns out what no one noticed is that the multiplication division operator pair are not to be used on the line. They don't work on the line. And I've covered that rather extensively, that is, many times, because it's so fundamental to see through our school training in what are the operators. Because we were all taught, and I know we were all taught, that multiplication and division pertain to the line as well. That is, they're linear operators. They certainly are not. And I discovered that in 2022. That there is another space for the plane besides squared plane. You know that c squared is a very important number, but it's squared. Why would it be squared? Because you have no choice. If you want to metricize the plane, which you must do in order to metricize volume space. And volumetric space is volume space with a metric. Well, it's still distance. That's the only measurement we can make with lines, is distance. And that uses only add. We pretend that we can use multiplication and division because you can conceive of multiplication as repeated addition. That works, but it breaks at limits that have to do with 0 and infinity on the line. And as I proved, 0 is in fact an infinity on the line. It's not a proper number because it doesn't exist. And in fact, that is the problem with quantization of the line, is that now, in order to use the line at all with add, you must have 0, which puts a hole in your system. As long as you're measuring distance, as the Greeks did, you don't have a serious problem with 0, because 0 is the additive identity. Well, you know that 1 is the multiplicative identity. So it's a different center number for the number system. That has never been perceived by any mathematician. There are difficulties in making an axiomatic assumption that way, though. And it's a stepladder of paradoxes which prevented mathematicians. I'm really making an apology for the mathematicians of the past 2.5 millennia. That no mathematician, until I perceived the relationship between the additive and identity for the line and the multiplicative identity, which, if you use it right, parameterizes the plane with circles. It's a circular parameterization of space, which is obviously more accurate if you can make it work. Well, one of the first paradoxes that you face if you make the assumption that I made, my hypothesis was that the circle on the plane, which obviously comprises two linear numbers, the plane would be two linear numbers, and we must use linear numbers because they're computable. A two-component number system, which I essentially discovered, it's tempting to say invented, but in science you don't want to invent anything unless it's a tool, such as calculus or the complex number system. These are tools that were invented by the human mind. They weren't discovered, they were invented. And calculus has a severe problem at zero, as you know. It leads to the supermassive black hole pseudogeometry, which is so ass backwards it's caused a pandemic of psychosis. Now today we're going to talk a little bit about psychosis. Science is psychotic now, and that can be seen. Such astute observers as Dr. Sabine Hassenfelder of Deutschland has gone out of her way. She's even written a book called Lost in Math, where she impugns the mathematicians and they cannot get out of her assault. So she's become famous, and now she's sold out, which is inevitable because these people are all trying to make money. Now over here you'll see two names, Terrence Howard versus Eric Weinstein. This particular video, which I'm just going to show a short clip from this video, so you'll see Eric Weinstein and you'll see Terrence Howard. And this was conducted on the Joe Rogan show, so Joe Rogan is in the room, and he's kind of an arbiter, really a commentator, on the confrontation between Eric Weinstein and Terrence Howard. Now, Eric Weinstein is psychotic. There's no question about that. He's a megalomaniac. He believes that he's some kind of mathematician. Well, the field is open for anybody, any pretender, such as Eric or Terence, to come along and start saying stuff because of all the paradoxes that exist in science. It's a logjam which humanity is pressuring science to come up with better answers, because the answers science is providing about the universe are simply wrong. They're psychotic. And Eric Weinstein is attempting to become the leader of Bedlam. He wants to be president of the loosely defined caste of mathematicians who are sacrosanct in America. And Eric wants to be the kingpin. He came out of nowhere. He's actually a stockbroker of some kind. He thrives in the New York milieu. He's basically a banking adjunct for usury, which is quite standard in America. It's considered to be normal to take people to the cleaners any way you can to just rob them of their money. Well, Eric functions in that system quite well, I would suppose, and he's a very, very shady character. He has nothing to offer. He has a system which he's written a paper on, probably the most convolute idea any human being has ever come up with, and that actually is the point. It cannot be understood. Kurt J. Mungle proved that. And it's just an amazing act of indecency that this man Eric Weinstein presents himself at all. Now, on this little clip, you're going to see him tearing, pardon the pun, but tearing Terence a new one. With Joe Rogan just, kind of like the Archbishop, yeah, we got to do this to you, Terence, because you're a nutcase. So Eric Weinstein, the chief psychotic in pseudoscience today, by his own will, how he got to the top is largely due to Lex Fridman. And they're both very similar characters in certain ways. They're vying for a position of authority. Lex, I would say, earned his position of at least popularity. He certainly doesn't present science in any way. He's not a scientist. Well, he is an industry scientist. He's brainwashing you to enjoy AI. And that's coming from all directions, so Lex is quite safe in his propaganda program. He may not even be aware fully that he is a propagandist, but objectively, that's all he is. He interviewed Netanyahu while the UN trials for genocide were going on. He interviewed the head of the genocidal campaign in order to familiarize the American public with what is obviously an ordinary human who just has a difficult job to do. Well, that's all you're allowed to know. But once the UN brought out, well, it certainly looks like genocide, well, it was over within just a couple of months. The UN finally decided, no, it's okay. It's obviously genocide, but we're not allowed to say so because we're under the jurisdiction of our own government. America just vetoed everything. And then, since the United States says it's okay, there's nothing the United Nations can do. So the United Nations failed in its duty. Well, Lex Fridman is part of that. And I can't impugn the man. I have no way of looking inside of his head. But as someone who's rather trained himself to see through persona, to what is it you're really trying to do there, Lex? Well, whether you know it or not, you're a monster. You're anti-scientific. You're anti-culture. Now, Eric is much worse because he actually has an agenda. So this little clip here should show you what I'm driving at. So we're going to switch over to that here. I have to get ready to do this. And listen to this.
Then you do this other thing, which is you teach.
That's Eric
and
Weinstein.
Your teaching is not good.
It's not good.
You tell us stuff that's not true.
You tell us stuff
that we can tell is not true. And then we say, okay, I can throw out the entirety of what he's saying. Well, 1 times 1 is not equal to 2.
That's Terrence.
Let's start there. In fact, I'm angry at Joe because Joe should have pushed back on that. Joe was in awe.
The calculator says 1 times 1 doesn't equal 1.
Each time you do that, I want to slap you and say,
I want to slap you.
Let's
hold on here. I want to slap you. All right. So that's aggression. That's actually violent. So what Eric is saying is you're so psychotic, you're so evil, that really people should listen to me. It's all about Eric here. Now that's Joe Rogan. I think that's all we need to observe here. I think you have the picture. Am I right here? Leave a comment if that was not convincing. Eric Weinstein has a system that he calls, he's given it a name. It's called a neologism. He calls his paper geometric unity. Well, let's take that apart. Is there any geometry that he has to offer? No. Even Einstein's relativity has a pseudo-geometry. It's called pseudo-hyperbolic geometry. It can't be called hyperbolic because the linear number system cannot address curvature. You need calculus and complexity to address curvature, showing the failing of the linear number system. It fails at 0. So what he's addressing here with his geometric unity is not geometry. So he's lying. He's a much bigger liar than Terence can ever be accused of being. So Eric is a complete hypocrite. Not only does he use the word geometric, he uses the word unity, which we're getting to that number right now. The number 1 is the center of a different number system. 0 is the center of the linear number system, and it only works for distance because it only works on the line. So the additive identity is absolutely necessary to cut off one part of the line at 0, which is a null point. It has no dimension. Well, that's the problem with the supermassive black hole and the Big Bang. They both have a null point as their frame of reference. Well, a frame of reference of 0 only works for distance. It only works in the linear systematic system of 1 line, 2 lines, where you have to use the right angle law, often called the Pythagorean theorem, And in 3D space, you do the same thing. You add up the squares and then take the square root. And that's the distance metric for volume cubic space. That was extended to space-time, and that's why space-time does not work. Because its frame of reference is meant to be a circular, that is, a spherical frame of reference. But a spherical frame of reference, as I proved in 2022, has a geometric center of 1, and 0 does not exist in the system. There actually is no 0. 0 is not a number. So it is possible to hypothesize, as I did, what if you assume that 0 is not part of the number system? Well, then it seems, you see, that's one of the paradoxes. Because if you assert that in your mind as a Gedanken experiment, what you get, excuse me, I do have allergies. I'll put this on pause. Oh boy, sorry about my face here, but I do have rather severe allergies, and this is a maximal allergy spring, so I'm actually in somewhat danger because I'm asthmatic. So pardon me for dipping my head every now and then, but I do have to keep... I have a lot of mucus being generated in my face right now. I'm sorry, but I can't control it. I'm on 2 kinds of medication for this, so I'm sorry about my eyes. Normally I'm just a bit more presentable. But I thought you would want to know the significance of the number 1 in context of cutting-edge popular physics, which is always fake. Joe Rogan is meaningless. Weinstein is a creep. And Terrence Howard is something of a hero. He's a folk hero because he's standing up to the system. Similarly, really, in their own proper respects, similarly to Dr. Alexander Unziker, he's standing up to the system and being crushed, basically ignored. And Dr. Sabine Hassenfelder, who's got quite a little program put together, I think she has an excellent presentation, but she's compromised herself, as is rather necessary in the long run. You have to give in to the system, or you simply won't be known about. Now, I'm capitalizing on that in a way, using these popular names. I want you to know that Terrence Howard, Terrence is spelled with 2 R's, but there's another man named Terrence Tao, and I want to turn you on to something that's as good as this shit with Weinstein is awful. So I want to present that to you. Well, I'm rather blessed in one way. I've got to say that my eyes cure themselves rather quickly, so I look basically as normal as I ever look now, so I hope I'm a little more presentable than I was a few seconds ago. What you see on the screen is probably the most well-developed, well-thought-out, beautiful presentation, science platform, always good. This is the Grant Sanderson station called 3 Blue 1 Brown. The video you see on the screen to date, after 2 months of being on the internet, has gotten over 2 million views. So I'm quite envious, in a proper way. Grant Sanderson is a genius. He's a bona fide genius, and I recommend all of his presentations. He is a remarkable and unique presenter. He's out of Stanford, which is rather holy to me, because I grew up so close to Stanford. I spent a lot of time at Stanford's coffee shop. I can't say that I spent a lot of time at Stanford, although I have used their stacks for a couple of research projects when I was in college. So I love Stanford. I certainly love Grant Sanderson, this young man. He's also, I've got to say this, the little guy is handsome. But he's got a mellifluous voice. He was just born for this work. But he's honest, he's good, he gives you valuable information. Just the opposite of Weinstein, who is really an ugly, ugly character. I followed Weinstein not really knowing who he was. Well, nobody knew who he was, but Lex Fridman certainly knew who he was. Now, I need to give you just a little bit of background on Lex Fridman. It's pretty obvious that he's Zionist controlled, which is a difficult assessment to make. I certainly couldn't prove that, but through indirect evidence, indirect proof from rather solid evidence, Lex Fridman is involved in a pyramid scheme. He single-handedly sent this nobody, this stockbroker from New York, Eric Weinstein, sent him right to the top. And now Eric has his own podcast. But it took me a while when I finally realized that this man was not going to go away. I didn't see anything seriously wrong with him. It's just that he had nothing about science worth saying. Every now and then he would refer to this rather mythical paper that he wrote on geometric unity, and when I heard the term, I knew that he was a crackpot, because there's no geometry in modern science anywhere, except on this program. So I want to play this for you to show you what a real science presentation can be like. This is Grant Sanderson, one of the greatest educational scientists on the planet today. Listen to this.
A lot of math enthusiasts will be familiar with Tao as a story of prodigy turned prodigious mathematician, but one of the most remarkable features of his career is how collaborative it's been, spanning an unusually wide breadth of topics within math. I had the chance to sit down with him, and I asked if there were any topics that he believed would benefit from some strongly visual presentation, and I fully expected an answer from pure math. But I was pleasantly surprised when he proposed instead the story of cosmic distances. It's the story of how humanity first figured out the sizes of objects from the size of...
You'll see rung one of the cosmic distance ladder is the measurement of the Earth, then the Moon, the Sun, shapes of orbits, distances to planets. Then he works in the speed of light, which was discovered in the 19th century, nearby stars, the Milky Way, nearby galaxies, and then distant galaxies. So that's quite a little lineup. Each one of these proofs is well worth seeing. And Terence Howard is a gifted mathematician. Now, when I say gifted, I'm talking about cosmic science. Terence fully understands the cosmic distance ladder. Now, it's one thing to understand the subject. It's really quite a bit different to be able to present it. So I recommend this video on the 3 Blue, 1 Brown station, which has over 7 million subscribers, and I am one of them. I don't see any reason not to subscribe to that. I never give money, just as I never ask for money. I don't deal with money, but these men all do. They're trying to make a living in their own way. So this is called Terence Howard on how we measure the cosmos. I'm huge on this topic, and this is the best presentation I've ever seen. I certainly learned something from each one of those 10 topics. Vastly interested in the geometry of the universe. That's really what my station presents, is the geometry of the universe, all the way down to the quantum level. Now that cannot be done with linear mathematics. We've known that for a century. But we haven't specifically known that it's the linear number system that's breaking our ability to do investigative science, to do science the right way, to get knowledge, understanding, and finally, if we can, get wisdom out of it. Because that's what we're after, is wisdom, which is an interesting thing to try to define. But so is understanding. Understanding is the synthesis of knowledge so it matches the universe. So you learn something valuable. That's understanding. Well, how you apply it is wisdom. And that is quite personal and tricky and philosophical and deep. But it's the essence of human life, is to get the answers we want from the universe itself that might help us figure out our human situation. That's where I come in. That's exactly what I've done all my life, minus the science. My first half of my life was devoted to Holy Scripture. Not just the Bible, but I was basically a Bible scholar. And I did decrypt the Tetragrammaton, so now I know the meaning, and I wrote 2 books on it. One of them was basically about the Sabbath, and which has to do with the lunar cycle. Valuable information that's been lost. Religion is on its way out, according to the white Westerns. Basically, the white Europeans have developed science to its present level of psychosis. And this gives a golden opportunity to destroy religion, which has been the itinerary for at least a century. You know that natural selection was artificially promoted to the position of law when it's not even a valid theory. So you know that from my lectures. Well, not very many people know that. And if they ever become aware of it in any way, they'll reject it out of hand because of brainwashing. So you're not allowed to know the truth now. You're not allowed to know where you're from. It's quite a difficult question once you eliminate natural selection, which has been absolutely disproved. The genetic code, the DNA semiotic transmission code, is locked. It can't be altered. And that's obvious that it can't be altered. So Darwin was wrong. Well, Darwin knew that he was wrong. But it was high time to challenge the church system of Europe. And in England, that was the Anglican Church. So that's what we covered quickly, so that you know how we got these crazy theories. Natural selection is pure, unadulterated psychosis. It's evil. It's an evil theory. It's crazy. But there's nothing better yet. Well, I have something better. Much better. So I'm a real scientist. Is Terrence Howard a real scientist? Yes. Is Terrence Howard a real scientist?
Failures
real science?
Of Joe's bullshit detector.
Joe's
At this
bullshit
point, I think
detector.
Joe's bullshit detector has become more of a magnet. It seems like every week he's got someone on his podcast with a new crackpot theory to sell the world.
A new crackpot theory to sell the world. Well, that perfectly describes Eric Weinstein. Terrence Howard is much, much closer to having a valid insight. I believe he does have a valid insight. His byline, which I found rather interesting, is that 1 times 1 equals 2. Well, that's a metaphor, obviously. I'm not sure how Terrence Howard interprets that himself, because I've never really talked with him. I'd like to talk with him. I'm not certain that that's possible, but I'm just saying, fancifully, I would enjoy talking with Terrence Howard, because I'd like to know where he came up with the idea of 1 times 1 equals 2. Do you know how to interpret that so it's actually a correct? As it stands, Eric is right. 1 times 1 does not equal 2. So why would Terrence Howard say such a provocative thing? I can tell you that it really arrested my attention because it's much more a powerful statement than anything Eric will ever come up with, which is nothing but psychosis. Kurchai Mungal essentially proved in a 3-hour presentation just a couple of weeks ago on geometric unity without Eric actually being there. But he did a good job. We're all waiting to hear how Eric responds to Kurchai Mungal's analysis, which is superb. And you can't understand one single goddamned word in 3 hours. And this was in the comments, thousands of comments. I made several comments along the way. I always praise Kurchai Mungal because he's dealing with poison. He's dealing with basically radioactive, deadly material. Geometric unity should not even be on anyone's lips. No one should know about Eric Weinstein at all. He's nothing but an actor. He's a pretender. And he is very conscious of what he's doing. He'll never let on because he's trained himself so well to lie. He's a deceiver. Is Terrence? Well, all of these guys are trying to get money. Fame equals money on YouTube. They all get money for their work, if you can even call it work. So we have a wide range of characters at large on the pseudoscience scene, and everything you get on YouTube is pseudoscience, with these magnificent, powerful exceptions, such as Grant Sanderson and Terrence Howard presenting the cosmic distance ladder. That's real science. That's valuable information. You want to know that. Do you want to know about geometric unity? Objectively speaking, I had to find out as much as I could about it because Eric stole my term. I discovered geometric unity. That's the number 1, the center of the multiplicative divisional proportional number system, which I proved, according to Max Planck's work, is entirely rational. That's what true quantization is. The counting system that the universe uses. Those are protons, because you can count them. It's the only thing in the universe. I shouldn't say thing, that's rather abstract. I don't want to say particle, but I will. It's the only particle in the universe. It's the only particle. The electron is the conjugal antiparticle, as I proved. This is a whole list of discoveries going to the quantum paradox itself, which I have clearly solved. You have to solve for infinity and imaginarity, though, so this is a process, even during my presentation cycle over the past 3 years, in which I've produced 950 science lectures. I was still learning the entire distance. One reason I started posting to YouTube was that I knew that this was a discovery vector that wasn't going to end. Well, it didn't. And over the past 3 years, I've solved a whole list of paradoxes in mathematical physics or physical mathematics. But you have to get down to the number system itself if you're going to solve at the subatomic level. That is the quantum level. Well, I discovered the quantum. It's the proton. Every proton is identical with every other proton. They do have 2 states. They switch from being neutrons to protons, and they can do so in either direction. Generally, a neutron changes state to a proton and then stays that way. But they do change from proton to neutron and neutron to proton. One is a bit differently induced. So it's not a bilateral relationship. It's just that the proton has these 2 states. So the neutron is considered to be a separate particle. It's not. It's the same particle with or without the charge property, which is quite critical in electrodynamics, as you know. And that was, of course, discovered first by James Clerk Maxwell, is the electromagnetic relationship. Well, that's not the same as the nuclear force system. And indeed, the atomic force system is not predicated on polarity. It's not plus minus. Although the charge system between electroforce and magnetoforce can be linearized because of the flow of electrons, and that's where we get the idea of positive and electric charge. But at the atomic level, it's not polaric. It's not opposite. It's conjugal on a spherical right angle. That's a critical insight which I made. So this new number system introduces solutions instantly to our mathematical problems, which affect our geometry of the supermassive black hole, which we're leading into. So I hope all of this fits together for you. I know this is a lot of information to synthesize. But essentially, we're leading up to the number 1, which is our primary number that we've selected to introduce the concept of a number. We're going to begin with the number 1 for extremely good reason. It's the first counting number. So it's the first true number. It metricizes a space, such as for the line, which is the jump from 0 to 1 is the quantum jump on the line, because there's nothing in between 0 and 1. This has been the topic of philosophical debate going all the way to Cantor and beyond, because there's an effort, a necessary effort, to continuize the straight line, which can't be done, or you lose the number system. Well, we have to have the number system, and we indeed must have the linear numbers, because only the linear numbers are computable. But it's a subset of the linear numbers that are computable, beginning with the number 1. So the counting system of the universe does not have 0 in it, because 0 is not a counting number. It's an imaginary number. That's very important, and it's also an infinity. So if you can get rid of 0, you have the opportunity to finitize the universe on a counting number system. Correct? The upper limit going out for the highest counting number, in this case it would be, you could say, circular distance. really spherical distance from an origin would go out in all directions equally at the same time, you could say, which is an interesting thing to say, because now you're introducing time. You have to solve for time. Well, Albert solved for time in linear space, but linear space has the zero. So general relativity has a limitation that we've reached. And the result of having really violated the limit through the illegitimate use of complex numbers and the calculus as tools to transform linearity into curvature, which means you're trying to get a rate, which is a two-component number, because it's distance over time. In any constructed space, distance over time is velocity if it has a direction. In spherical space, the direction is out or in, towards the center, which would be gravity, or going out, which would be electromagnetic radiation. Both of those are pressures. But gravity is only a pressure in space. It doesn't affect time. So what is time measuring a pressure? It's measuring a pressure. It's a pressure wave measurement is time. But it's a derivative of energy. So what we're really measuring is the relationship between energy and space. Space is contracted by the protons. And so those would be little tiny centers of the universe, but that doesn't make sense to us. Well, it's got to make sense in some way, because that's what's pressurizing space to go in. Everything spins in the universe, which leads to a very interesting paradox. And then you have to account, well, what's the counterforce that compensates for spatial contraction? It's energic falling, that the photon is falling. It has no impetal force, so it's falling through space in another conjugal dimension that's involved with space, so it's space energy. So you have to compute light transmission as a space energy relationship. I discovered that. So that concludes our 40-minute presentation for today. I hope you got something out of this. We are now going to go on to the number 2, and then we're going to concentrate on how using the number 2 as the dual metric of a new spatial conception transcending that of Einstein. It's not space-time, that's a linear solution, which is false at the limits, because it doesn't compensate for 0 or for infinity. I can compensate for 0 and infinity by conjugating the two infinities. And that'll be in the Boschkovich force curve. You'll see it again. You can see all of this in my prior lectures, but I never expect anyone to go back and look until at least I index them. I promise to do that. That's 38 minutes. Thank you for tuning in on this 6th day of May, right after Cinco de Mayo. I hope you had a good yesterday celebrating the Independence Day of Mexico. We'll be right back. Keep looking up. This is Anna Galactic, about to go to live stream within the next few days. The paper will be issued within the next couple of weeks, and we're going to have a lot more to say about the number 2 and the force balance system that unifies gravity and electromagnetics so clearly you'll never doubt the answer again. And then the physicists will have to catch up with you. I won't be here much longer. I'm going on to the next level shortly, but I hope that somebody carries forward what I've discovered. It's valuable to all men and all children. It's valuable to all humans. It'll give you what you need to get you back on the path to finding out the meaning of your existence. Isn't that what you want? Stay tuned, you're going to get it here. We'll be right back.